In 1961, 8 central banks met behind closed doors in Basel. No cameras, no transcripts. Their mission? To keep gold below $35 an ounce. Not because they cared about gold, but because gold was the mirror of the dollar. If that mirror cracked, the entire post-war illusion would collapse with it. The group called itself the London Gold Pool. Officially, it was a coordinated market operation. In truth, it was a defense line for the world's new empire, the empire of paper promises. Each member, the US, Britain, Germany, France, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, poured gold into a shared vault. When prices rose, they dumped bullion onto the market. When confidence wavered, they whispered stability. It worked for a while, but beneath that calm surface, numbers told another story. By 1965, America's gold reserves had fallen by half. Dollars, meanwhile, flooded every corner of the planet, more than $20 billion circulating abroad, each note claiming the right to be exchanged for metal that no longer existed in equal measure. A global game of musical chairs had begun, and still Washington insisted. $1 equals 1/35 of an ounce of gold. The statement became sacred. The world believed it, or pretended to. Economists called it the Bretton Woods system. Politicians called it stability. Yet the truth was simpler and far more fragile. Every dollar spent beyond America's borders was a small leak in the ship. Every promise of convertibility was another hole patched with words. Some historians believe the gold pool was not a financial experiment, but an early form of control, a symbolic firewall between trust and panic. The mechanism was ingenious: defend the symbol, not the substance. Keep the illusion alive, and power would follow. But illusions demand constant energy. Every ounce sold to protect the dollar drained the very foundation that made it credible. The more the U.S. defended its currency, the weaker it became. A paradox worthy of empire. And now imagine 8 men in a marble room, weighing bars of gold against a tide of paper, deciding how much reality the world was allowed to see. The decision they made that day would echo through 5 centuries of financial ambition, from the Spanish silver fleets to the British pound, and now the dollar's turn under the same light. The pattern was ancient. The empire changes, the principle stays. Power first creates its currency, then becomes hostage to it. The year was 1944. The war was not yet over, but its outcome was already decided. Amid ruins and ration cards, the victors were drafting a new order, not of armies but of accounts. In a small New Hampshire town called Bretton Woods, 44 nations gathered to answer one question: what would money mean after the fire? The answer came in the form of a promise. The US dollar would become the world's anchor, convertible to gold at a fixed rate, $35 per ounce. All other currencies would peg themselves to it. Gold was still the heart, but the dollar became its bloodstream. For the first time in history, one nation's money became everyone's reserve. On paper, it looked logical. The United States held more than 2/3 of the world's gold, its industry untouched by war, its economy booming. Confidence seemed natural. But beneath the optimism lay a silent asymmetry. The system gave Washington the privilege of creating global liquidity by issuing dollars that other nations were obliged to accept. It was, effectively, a license to print trust. Europe rebuilt itself with American loans. Japan received aid. Latin America tied its fate to U.S. investment. And the more the dollar spread, the more indispensable it became. By 1958, convertibility was restored in Europe. The world economy was moving again, powered by American credit. But every expansion has a cost. Charles de Gaulle called it the exorbitant privilege. He saw what others preferred to ignore, that the system was a pyramid built on confidence, not parity. As long as foreign central banks held dollars and refrained from demanding gold, the illusion would hold. But if they ever did, the base would crumble. Meanwhile, America itself was changing. The war machine had transformed into a consumer empire. Cars, refrigerators, highways. Prosperity became an exportable ideology. To finance it, the U.S. began running persistent deficits. Dollars flowed out for military bases, aid packages, and imports. while gold quietly flowed in the opposite direction. By the early 1960s, that imbalance became impossible to hide. European banks accumulated dollars far beyond their trade needs. The Bundesbank in Germany, the Banque de France, they began to ask questions. What if this paper, once sacred, was simply a claim without cover? In response, Washington doubled down. The Federal Reserve and Treasury worked with allies to maintain the illusion of control. Thus, the London Gold Pool was born, a cartel not to manipulate competitors, but to protect belief itself. Yet history had already seen this movie. In the 16th century, Spain's silver from the New World flooded Europe, devaluing its own wealth. In the 19th, Britain's pound reigned until its empire could no longer sustain the gold standard. Each power believed its currency immortal. Each mistook privilege for strength. The dollar inherited both their ambition and their curse. It became the empire's bloodstream, but also its addiction. Every crisis that followed, Vietnam, oil, inflation, would trace its roots to this moment, when money stopped being a measure of value and became a projection of power. The stage was set. The world trusted a promise backed by a finite metal, but issued by an infinite printing press. The contradiction was elegant, invisible, and fatal. By the mid-1960s, the numbers no longer matched the story. On the balance sheets of the U.S. Treasury, there were roughly $14 billion worth of gold, but more than $30 billion circulating abroad, all of them theoretically convertible into that same gold. The arithmetic was impossible, yet the faith persisted. It had to. The dollar was the world's oxygen. No one wanted to ask how pure the air really was. But pressure always finds a crack. It started quietly. Central banks in Europe began redeeming small portions of their reserves. Switzerland requested $50 million in gold. Then France demanded $150 million. In 1965, a French warship sailed into New York Harbor carrying instructions from President de Gaulle himself. Exchange paper for metal. It was more than a transaction, it was a declaration. The gesture sent ripples through the system. If one major ally could doubt the dollar, others might follow. To reassure markets, the United States sold gold through the London Pool, yet every ton shipped overseas deepened the same hole it was meant to fill. Between 1961 and 1968, America lost over 3,000 tons of gold, nearly half of what it had when the pact began. At the same time, the U.S. budget sank under new weights: the Vietnam War, the Great Society programs, and the expansion of global bases. Each demanded dollars, not discipline. And when foreign governments tried to stem the tide by buying gold, Washington accused them of destabilizing the system it had built. The paradox was complete. Those defending value were now seen as threats to stability. The market understood before politicians did. In March 1968, the London Gold Pool collapsed. Traders ignored official prices. Demand exploded. Within days, the market price of gold soared above $40 per ounce. The illusion of control? Gone. Panic spread through boardrooms and ministries. The dollar, once as good as gold, was suddenly just paper backed by promises. To restore confidence, the United States closed the London market for 2 weeks, an emergency shutdown of the world's oldest money. When it reopened, gold trading was split into two worlds: an official price that no one believed, and a free price that no one could stop. The system still functioned on paper, but the trust that sustained it had fractured. Nations began to accumulate gold again, quietly building defenses for a post-dollar future. The signal was unmistakable. The empire's currency had entered its terminal phase. Some economists later called it the dollar's slow divorce from reality. A fitting phrase, because divorces rarely happen overnight. They are years of denial, 1,000 small decisions that finally converge into a single, irreversible moment. That moment would arrive in August 1971, when the window to gold slammed shut forever. But by then, the story was already written, not in ink, but in imbalance. Every empire believes its money is different. Every empire discovers it isn't. To understand how the system broke, one must first see how it worked. At Bretton Woods, the world accepted a simple chain of trust. Gold anchored the dollar anchored every other currency. In theory, that meant stability. In practice, it meant hierarchy. Only one nation, the United States, had the right to create the world's reserves. Every foreign central bank that held dollars played its part in this structure. When it received U.S. currency, it deposited it back into American banks or bought U.S. Treasury bonds. The money flowed out for imports, aid, or military spending, and flowed back as loans to Washington. The circle was elegant. America spent, the world saved, and both called it prosperity. Economists later named it the dollar recycling mechanism, but a simpler image fits better, a boomerang. Every dollar sent abroad eventually returned home, demanding interest. The U.S. could print what others had to earn. Its deficits became the planet's liquidity, its debt the planet's savings. The London Gold Pool was the operational firewall protecting this system. Whenever market demand for gold rose, the pool sold from its shared reserves to suppress the price. The logic was mechanical. If gold remained fixed, the dollar appeared strong. If the dollar appeared strong, foreign governments kept holding it. Each intervention bought a few more months of faith. But each sale was also a confession, a quiet admission that market forces were stronger than decree. By 1967, France withdrew from the pool, calling it a fiction sustained by exhaustion. Germany hesitated to contribute further. The Bank of England, acting as the pool's agent, was selling more than it owned. Gold was leaving London faster than reports could explain. Then came the sterling crisis of 1967. Britain devalued its pound by 14%, shaking confidence in fixed exchange rates. Investors began converting dollars to gold again. Within weeks, the pool was bleeding hundreds of tons. The mechanism was eating itself alive. At its core, the flaw was mathematical. The U.S. could either maintain the $35 peg or finance its growing empire, but not both. To defend the dollar, it needed to raise interest rates and cut spending. To sustain its global reach, it had to do the opposite. Each choice undermined the other. In Washington, officials spoke of defending the system, but the system they defended was no longer real. It had become a feedback loop. More dollars issued to sustain growth, more pressure on gold, more interventions to hide the gap. Trust was the only collateral left, and trust, once questioned, behaves like contagion. When the London Gold Pool finally collapsed in March 1968, the defense line vanished. The two-tier market that replaced it, one official, one free, institutionalized the lie. Governments pretended the dollar was still tied to gold, while markets priced it as paper. Both sides knew the truth, but agreed not to say it aloud. The mechanism had achieved what every empire's financial system eventually does. It replaced substance with ritual. The flow continued, but meaning drained out. Some historians see in this the perfect metaphor for modern power, the illusion of infinite credit sustained by collective silence. If this helped you see the logic behind the illusion, share where you're watching from. When the gold pool collapsed, the facade cracked, but the structure didn't fall immediately. It lingered like a building with invisible fractures. Between 1968 and 1971, those cracks widened until the entire foundation gave way. What followed was not an event, but an unmasking. In August 1971, President Richard Nixon appeared on television. His tone was calm, his words careful. The United States would temporarily suspend the dollar's convertibility into gold. The world watched in silence. In that moment, the last link between money and metal was severed. 40 years of post-war order ended with one televised sentence. But the deeper shift was psychological. For the first time in modern history, global currency was based entirely on faith. Faith in policy, faith in stability, faith in America. The dollar no longer represented gold, it represented trust itself. And trust, once detached from substance, can multiply without limit. The immediate consequences were chaotic. By 1973, exchange rates floated freely. The price of gold tripled. Inflation erupted across the West, 10%, 12%, sometimes more. Oil producers paid in devalued dollars raised their prices to compensate. The first oil shock of 1973 wasn't just about fuel. It was a geopolitical invoice for a broken promise. Ordinary citizens paid the hidden cost. Their savings eroded, their wages lagged. Every loaf of bread, every car, every mortgage carried the invisible tax of monetary expansion. Economists called it stagflation, stagnation plus inflation, an impossible combination by old models. But it wasn't impossible. It was simply the true cost of confidence unmoored from reality. Meanwhile, the system reinvented itself. The dollar, free from gold, found a new anchor, oil. In secret negotiations with Saudi Arabia in 1974, Washington secured a deal. All global oil sales would be priced in dollars. In exchange, the U.S. guaranteed military protection. Thus was born the Petrodollar, a new empire built not on gold, but on energy and geopolitics. The mechanism shifted, but the logic remained. America exported paper, the world sent back goods, labor, and resources. Once again, the imbalance was recast as order. Central banks still held dollars, now not for convertibility, but for survival. To trade oil, they needed dollars. To get dollars, they bought U.S. debt. The circle closed again, this time without metal to break it. Yet each cycle of substitution, from gold to oil, from promise to policy, made the system more abstract, more dependent on perception. Money became language, and America became its grammar. Some saw triumph in this transformation. The empire had escaped the limits of matter. Others saw a countdown, because every abstraction pushed far enough invites its reckoning. By the end of the 1970s, inflation had reached double digits. Confidence returned only after interest rates were raised to levels that broke entire economies. The cost of sustaining the dollar's supremacy was measured not in gold, but in recessions, debt crises, and social unrest. The gold standard had died quietly. Its ghost remained, haunting every central bank that still measures value in paper. The system survived by changing its skin, but every change carried the same lesson forward, unnoticed. Half a century later, the script feels familiar. Only the names have changed. The principles, they never did. After 1971, money was no longer anchored to matter. It was anchored to policy, and later, to belief. Central banks became the new alchemists, turning government promises into global reserves. When the economy slowed, they cut rates. When panic struck, they printed more. In the 1970s, it was called stimulus. In 2008, quantitative easing. In 2020, emergency support. Each era invents its vocabulary. The logic stays the same. Then it was gold. Today, liquidity. Then it was convertibility. Now, credibility. The form changes, the dependency deepens. The mechanism of trust has evolved into code. Money moves through servers, not vaults. Balance sheets stretch into trillions, yet no one asks what backs them, because nothing does. Debt, once an obligation, has become infrastructure. It is the invisible battery of growth. Governments issue it, markets absorb it, citizens live inside its current, and the world, once again, runs a surplus of paper and a deficit of faith. The ratio is different, but the imbalance identical. For every real unit of productivity, there are layers of derivatives, credit, and leverage, abstractions stacked on abstractions. The global economy, in effect, is a leveraged bet on its own stability. In 2008, the cracks appeared again. Banks fell like dominoes. The system froze, and for a moment, the world glimpsed what happens when liquidity disappears, when trust stops moving. The solution was predictable: create more money. Central banks coordinated their balance sheets just as the London Gold Pool once coordinated its bars. Instead of gold, they injected digits. Instead of vaults, they used screens. The defense was the same: stabilize the illusion no matter the cost. By 2020, that illusion had reached planetary scale. Trillions were created overnight to keep economies breathing through lockdowns. No gold shipments this time. No meetings in Basel, just synchronized keystrokes. The result? Markets surged while production halted. The map of value detached completely from the territory. And yet, the pattern remained beautiful in its symmetry. The same triangle of power: currency, empire, belief. When one weakens, the others bend to support it. The dollar still reigns, not because it's flawless, but because no other system is ready to replace it. Some economists call this the privilege of inertia, others the trap of success. Both are true. The dollar became the bloodstream of global trade, but also its constraint. Every crisis forces the U.S. to print more, making the world more dependent on the very source of its vulnerability. Today, nations speak of de-dollarization, of trading in local currencies, of digital alternatives. The same dream France had in 1965 or Britain in 1919. But power does not retire gracefully. It fades, resisting, rewriting its logic to survive. The empire of paper has evolved into the empire of data. Gold once measured confidence. Today, algorithms do. The symbols changed. The psychology did not. Trust is still the last remaining asset. And somewhere, behind closed doors, new guardians of value gather. Central bankers, technologists, investors, once again asking the same old question: how long can belief outpace substance? 5 centuries, 5 empires, 1 rhythm. Each believed it had mastered value. Each mistook motion for power. Spain had silver, Britain had gold, America, paper. Every age invented its currency, and every currency eventually outgrew its meaning. The lesson is never in the collapse itself. It's in the silence before it. The years when everyone agrees that this time it's different. When numbers rise faster than production. When credit replaces creation. When confidence becomes policy. That's when empires age, not in defeat, but in denial. History does not repeat. It rhymes through systems. Silver, gold, paper, code. All obey the same gravity. Trust must be earned, not printed. The world's reserve changes form, but never its function. It always begins as a measure of value and ends as a monument to belief. The dollar didn't listen. It survived every warning, absorbed every crisis, turned every failure into proof of strength. But in doing so, it repeated the same ancient pattern, the belief that power can suspend consequence, that if everyone agrees on the illusion becomes truth. And yet, beneath the graphs and policies, the logic remains human. We trade trust as if it were infinite. We build systems as if memory fades. But history remembers. It waits, quietly, for the next empire to overstay its privilege. The story of money is the story of self-deception refined into science. And the final chapter is never written by the dominant currency, but by what replaces it.